Siya Kolisi may not be a name that you're overly familiar with, but the 26-year-old South African back row has today been named as the country's first ever black captain. He takes on the role for the upcoming series against England, 25 years since apartheid, and we got to wondering about the significance of the appointment, the first black captain in South Africa's 127-year history, and of course the appointment made by a name very familiar to Irish rugby fans, Rassie Erasmus. So Pieter Du Toit is the editor of HuffPost in South Africa, and he joins us on the line to discuss this. Thanks for taking the call. Peter, first of all, will you tell us a little bit about Siya Kolisi? Who is he, and why is he the new South Africa captain?
Good evening, gents. Yes, well, it's a green letter day, as it were, in South African rugby with the appointment of a black Springbok captain. Given our history of segregation, of race relations, our fraught history of race relations, apartheid, hundreds of years of colonialism, and the fact that rugby was such an important part of the apartheid architecture, of the Afrikaner nationalism ideology. It's pretty important, pretty significant, the fact that we now have a black Springbok rugby captain who comes from the Eastern Cape. He is not from the traditional rugby background, but the mere fact that we now have a black man leading a sport which is widely regarded as a white man's sport, definitely the Afrikaner sport, it's pretty significant.
Yeah, I see a photograph over your right-hand shoulder there of Nelson Mandela. I'm sure this would have been a momentous occasion for Nelson Mandela. So how has it been received? What sort of coverage has there been? How's it gone down in the country?
It's been a big moment. There's been lots of media coverage, of course, as you might imagine. Rugby is still one of the biggest sports in the country at the moment, although you Irish have proven to be our nemesis over the last couple of seasons. But of course, it has received a lot of attention. We're a country that's still grappling with race relations, still very much grappling with our past, coming to terms with, as I said earlier, apartheid and colonialism. And 26 years after unity in the sport, 24 years after our first democratic election, of course, it's led to a lot of debate in this country about where we are, why has it taken so long for a black captain to be appointed, what are the barriers to entry for black South Africans into this sport. One thing that your listeners and yourselves might not be familiar with is the fact that black rugby has a long and proud history in this country. When the British were our colonial masters, that sport, as well as cricket, was used as a tool to anglicize the population. So there's a proud history of black rugby, which unfortunately, given white domination for so long, has been ignored. And there's certainly a feeling in this country that black rugby is now coming into its own. Of course, you would have the debate whether or not Kolisi was appointed on merit. And of course, from some conservative corners, people are now saying no, he is just appointed as an effort to window dress, as an effort to appease the politics. But Kolisi has been one of the standout performers for his provincial team for the last couple of years. But obviously, it's a big rugby moment. But for our society, getting to grips with our history, it's a big thing.
Peter, I just noted, I was reading the accounts of the press conference, and there's a wider point as well. There's 20 black players in the 43-man squad, which is quite significant, I would have thought. But also there seemed to be a bit of controversy over a question to Rassie Erasmus about recent events. And this was referring to a flare-up in a SuperSport studio between former Boks Ashwin Willems, Nick Mallet and Nace Botha, and Willems walked off. What was this all about? It seemed to be an inference that he was a quota player when he played, that somebody made this inference.
Yes, that was we're in a period in our country's post-apartheid and democratic history where certainly the black population of South Africa is starting to question the democratic transition that we had in the early 1990s. And Ashwin Willems, who was a former Springbok wing, stormed off set during a live rugby broadcast last week, Super Rugby broadcast. And the working theory is, at least, we don't know what happened. We don't have the facts with us as of yet. But the working theory is that Willems, as a black rugby player, felt that he was being demeaned by two white former Springboks who played during the apartheid era, and that he just felt he's had enough. Now, whether or not that is true, we don't know, but that's what the debate in this country is. It's led to a broader debate in society about how coloured and black people are treated, subliminal racism, the fact that they need to work so much harder to prove their worth in a society that's and an economy certainly that's by and large still dominated by white people. So I think it shouldn't. It's not unexpected that broader issues in society has now found resonance in something like sport.
Yeah, that was an interesting case. I watched the coverage earlier on. There didn't seem to be anything overtly in the piece that certainly made it to air. Maybe there was something off air, and I know that the CEO of the TV station has sat them all down and they're all friends again, and apparently going to continue to broadcast maybe as early even as this weekend. So we'll see how that one's plays out over the next while. One report that I listened to earlier, Peter, E! News was saying that racism in club rugby in South Africa is still an issue. And I just note that in combination with you using the expression earlier on about barriers to entry for black players into the game there. So will you just talk to us a little bit about that? Are there barriers to entry?
Well, certainly. The apartheid government, which was premised on Afrikaner nationalism, which was premised on keeping the country a white country and subjugating the black populace, put in a lot of money in the white education system, and that meant that white children for decades and hundreds of years, when they went to school, they had access to the best facilities, the best opportunities, the best teachers, the best educational system, whilst black children did not have that opportunity. Now that of course inculcated a culture of rugby, a culture of cricket, hockey, soccer, and football, pretty much like you get in the public school system in Ireland and in Britain, Australia, and New Zealand. But for the black population, they did not have that. There were missionary schools run by Scottish missionaries and English missionaries, especially in the Eastern Cape, where the new Springbok captain hails from, which did have those opportunities. But by and large, the black population did not for many years have access to facilities and opportunities. That means that for black people who really love the sport, it's very difficult to get involved. Yeah.
A conversation like this can, and it just strikes me even as we're having the conversation that it must be a particularly, you would hope it's a particularly healthy thing for South African society, and it's a great opportunity for ourselves to have the conversation as well. You do wonder when something like this comes up, and regardless of how it's come about, and Kieran mentioned obviously that Rassie Erasmus in the press conferences, made some statements today. It's not about tokenism. So I wonder whether on a practical level, Peter, what impact it has. Does this challenge the idea of racism at a very grassroots level in South Africa, or actually does it have the converse impact and end up exaggerating the problem?
Look, I would hope it would challenge the status quo. We've got enormous problems in our country. We've got enormous problems around unemployment, around a slowing economy. We've had a corrupt president for a decade now, has at long last been replaced. So we are a country that's taken some serious hits over the last couple of years. And as you well know, sport has the potential to unify people, and it has the potential to lift the dark clouds that can sometimes settle over a nation, a society, or a country. Now, I would hope that the appointment of Siya Kolisi goes a long way to challenge the status quo in the sport. Certainly, Siya is someone that, as I said earlier, has been a star performer in his own right, and if anything, he should have been appointed last year. It's fantastic to see that Rassie Erasmus has managed to pick such a large number of players that do not come from a traditional rugby background. And as a rugby lover, even if we lose some tests going forward, it's crucial that we try to normalize our society. It's crucial that black South Africans also take ownership of the national rugby team. And I think our rugby can be so much stronger for it if we can utilize the large player base that we have. It's useless just to rely on a small white player base. If we have hundreds, thousands of black players who really want to get involved, so it's heartening to see. And I think Kolisi would be a fantastic asset, and I think he'll do the jersey proud. we're looking forward to thump Eddie Jones' English when they arrive here next month, and we hope
can all get behind that.
Proud.
Just on that, Peter, you mentioned that he'll do the Jersey Pride, but I think there would always be pressure on whoever takes on the South African captaincy for the first time. But to do it in these circumstances where there's so much talk of him being a black man taking it on, is he the kind of character that will embrace that kind of pressure and that kind of role?
Absolutely, he's quite a character. He's very determined. He obviously comes from a compared to my own background as a privileged white Afrikaner, he comes from a very challenging background. He didn't know his father. He didn't have access to resources and facilities like white players do. But he went to Western Province. He went to Cape Town. He worked under a number of very experienced coaches who saw talent in him, and he took up the cudgels, and he's made a success of his career. He's well respected in Western Province, in Cape Town, and in those surrounds. He's led the province since I think 2016, if I'm not mistaken. He's respected by those players. He's respected by the New Zealanders, by the Australians who we play week in and week out. But yes, look, it is a tough burden, and I think he realizes what the burden is. He not only represents Springbok rugby, but I think he represents generations of black rugby players from the early 1900s who played in separate black and coloured unions while the white rugby union team was touring Britain and New Zealand and Australia and all these places. The black rugby community forged ahead. So he's representing that community as well. And it's quite a heavy task to carry, and it's a heavy burden to carry. But I would venture to guess that Siya Kolisi has broad enough shoulders to do that. Look, the Springbok captaincy in this country is about more than sport. You guys know very well the story of Francois Pienaar in 1995 with Nelson Mandela and the way that the role they played to attempt to unite a deeply divided country. I think what people tend to forget is how close we came to civil war in the early 1990s. How close we came to serious bloodshed, and moments like the Springboks beating the All Blacks at Ellis Park with a black president wearing the apartheid jersey were big moments. I don't think we kicked on. I don't think we really took advantage of those moments as we should have. But Siya Kolisi certainly is someone that I think sees the importance of the moment, and I think Rassie Erasmus, that you guys in Ireland know, does too.
Would replacing the Springbok emblem help along that road as well, Peter? Is that something that's likely to happen, do you think?
That's a debate that's flared up as well in the wake of the Ashwin Willemse Nick Mallet incident last week. That's a debate that's flared up in the wake of Siya Kolisi's appointment. It's very difficult. Nelson Mandela was magnanimous in victory. He understood that he needed to get the dominant white population on his side if he was to forge a new nation, if he was to forge a new country. So there's been a number of compromises around the emblem. The pervasive theory here is that, look, there's a strong lobby that says it needs to go. It's still a divisive emblem of a racist past. And there's other people that say, look, there's been compromises made. The emblem is now shifted to the other side of the chest. It's been replaced on the left side of the chest with a king protea, which is a national symbol. The issues in South African rugby runs much deeper than the emblem of the national team. It's about access to resources, access to facilities, and a culture which is often perceived as still being locked in the pre-democratic era.
Just before we let you away, Peter, it seems like next year, if I'm right, the quota system that we've been touching on there that has caused so much strife for Willemse this week, it's going to go to 50%, I think, next year, if I'm right. How is that going to happen? How is it going to be received? Is this going to be another point of tension, or is this something that everybody kind of accepts? I mean, I gather from what you've been saying earlier on in terms of the conservative element of it, they're always going to be, I'm assuming, against this type of thing. But talk to us a little bit about that.
I'm uncertain how exactly it will work. I'm uncertain if it will be regulated by the South African Rugby Union, or how exactly they will enforce it. The debate in rugby circles over here is that perhaps rugby hasn't bought into the democratic era as it should have. Perhaps there are especially rugby unions up country in the north, Johannesburg, Pretoria, the more conservative parts of the country, haven't really done enough to try and transform the sport from a pure Afrikaner white English game into a truly national game. So I think there's certainly some frustrations in some quarters that it needs to be enforced much stricter and much stronger. Of course, there will be lots of opposition to it, as there is in regards to employment equity in the public sector, or employment equity and affirmative action in the private sector. There are many chartered accountants, doctors, lawyers. We do have a process of affirmative action in this country to try and right the wrongs of the past. Rugby as a national asset probably is no different. But the problem is it's much deeper than I said earlier. It needs to start at grassroots. If we can sort out grassroots rugby at schools level, at club level, surely then we will be able to establish a pipeline of talented sportsmen which needn't be considered on the basis of race or where they come from. But if it doesn't happen, I can understand that the authorities and the rugby administration wants to take a stronger hand.
Yeah, good stuff. All right, Peter, thanks a lot for taking our call. Peter Du Toit on the line there from his home in Johannesburg, Editor-in-Chief of HuffPost in South Africa. Hey, hope you enjoyed that latest offering from Off the Ball. If you want to subscribe, and you should, check out just up here. All our latest stuff is just down here. Generally, knock yourself out.